A former children's hospital chaplain sits behind bars at the Butler County Jail in Ohio, and his friends say he's not the same man after being placed in solitary confinement for trying to lead Muslim inmates in prayer. Imam Ayman Soliman, who once comforted families of dying children at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, now faces deportation to Egypt, a country where he says he'll face certain death. But this isn't just another immigration case. This is a story about religious freedom, targeted harassment, and how the system can break even the strongest among us. So what exactly happened to this beloved chaplain, and why are his friends saying he was never the same after 4 days in isolation? The current immigration enforcement landscape has dramatically shifted across America. In California, federal agents are conducting operations that have led to confrontations with local communities. Just last week in San Bernardino, warning shots were fired during an immigration enforcement operation when a driver refused to comply with federal agents, injuring 2 officers before fleeing the scene.
According to the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, the driver refused to comply with officers' commands and rolled up his window before attempting to flee the scene. The fleeing vehicle injured 2 officers as it accelerated, prompting a responding CBP agent to fire 3 warning shots in an effort to regain control. The incident, partially captured on video, shows officers breaking the vehicle's windows and attempting to subdue the driver, who ultimately escaped. No bystanders were reported injured during the exchange, though the event quickly garnered national attention due to the involvement of federal law enforcement in a sanctuary city context. Following the incident, the driver reported to local police that masked men had attacked him and fired shots. Due to California's sanctuary policies, local authorities did not detain him, reflecting tensions between state and federal jurisdictions.
These incidents reflect the escalating tensions between federal enforcement and sanctuary jurisdictions. Meanwhile, detention facilities are expanding at an unprecedented rate. Take the case of Chong Dong, who came to America as a child refugee from Vietnam in 1981.
She says he had a difficult home life, and in 1989, he pled guilty to robbery after stealing 2 speakers at age 19. He spent time in prison where she says he turned his life around. He now works inspecting hospital and healthcare construction projects, his immigration case long on the government's back burner.
He is trying to fix his status. We've been fixing his status for over 15 years.
On Wednesday, they went to his annual check-in with ICE, which he's been doing for 25 years. This time, he was detained, even as she tried to explain he has a pending case.
But I didn't care. I didn't care. And one of the agents was laughing, was smiling, giggling. I think that's funny. You know? To them, it's like destroying people, family is something that they can laugh at.
They could have removed him back in 1999.
After decades of building a life here, working in healthcare construction and attempting to fix his immigration status for 15 years, he was suddenly detained during a routine check-in he'd been attending for a quarter century. His detention is based on a conviction from 1989, when he was just 19 years old. The Otay Mesa Detention Center where he's held is just one facility in a massive expansion that will more than double ICE detention capacity to over 100,000 people nationwide. This surge in enforcement has prompted strong reactions from local officials. Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser recently addressed the federal deployment of forces to her city, stating that the numbers simply don't justify this level of response.
There's work to be done. Yes.
We've heard that the National Guard may be using weapons to these soldiers.
That's a question for the Department of the Army.
Well, you must be concerned about that since they're not trained in law enforcement.
They can't do law enforcement as far as I know.
So that's got to be concerning to you that if they're armed.
That is not what I have been advised, and unless their orders have somehow changed, I don't know that they can engage in arrest. Yes.
If I can follow up.
Yes, sure.
Is there any coordination between your office and the White House, Pam Bondi, Kash Patel?
Yes.
But are you getting the answers to your questions, or is it not as clear as you would like it?
I think we're 7 or 8 days into this situation, and it evolves.
What does that mean?
It means just what I said.
It's evolving or it evolves?
I'm not gonna get into the difference in suffixes with you.
Mayor Bowser.
Oh, yes, it's changed from day to day. Let me put it that way.
She questioned why military forces would be deployed in an American city to police Americans, calling the situation senseless given the actual crime statistics in the district. But to understand Ayman Solomon's case, we need to go back to 2014, when a young journalist fled Egypt during one of the most turbulent periods in the country's modern history. Solomon had worked as a journalist during the Arab Spring, documenting the pro-democracy movement that swept across the Middle East, but his work came at a deadly cost. Egyptian authorities arrested, beat, and tortured him for his journalism. The scars from that experience would follow him across continents, but they wouldn't define his future, at least not yet. Solomon managed to escape Egypt and make his way to the United States, where he applied for asylum. In 2018, after years of legal proceedings, he was granted asylum status. This wasn't just a bureaucratic victory, it was a lifeline. For Solomon, returning to Egypt meant facing the same authorities who had tortured him before, except this time the consequences would likely be fatal. But Solomon didn't just survive in America, he thrived. He found his calling as a Muslim chaplain at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, one of the nation's premier pediatric medical centers. This wasn't just any job. Hospital chaplains serve families during their darkest moments, offering comfort to parents watching their children battle life-threatening illnesses. They perform prayers upon request, provide emotional support, and help medical teams understand how patients' religious beliefs affect their healthcare decisions. Solomon became known throughout the Cincinnati community for his compassionate care that transcended religious boundaries. He didn't just serve Muslim families, he comforted families of all faiths and backgrounds. When poor families in the neonatal intensive care unit faced the unthinkable task of burying their infants, Solomon researched funeral homes and found one in northern Kentucky that would perform infant funerals free of charge. This was the man who, on July 9, 2025, walked into a routine immigration check-in at the Homeland Security office in Blue Ash, Ohio, expecting to return home to his family that evening. Instead, ICE agents and FBI officials were waiting for him. What followed was a 2-hour interrogation that would change everything. The agents asked Solomon about his views on Egyptian politicians and well-known organizations in Egypt and the surrounding Middle East. They questioned him about his time in the United States and his family's political affiliations. At the end of the interview, they placed him under arrest. The reason? In June 2025, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services had revoked Solomon's asylum status, the same asylum that had been keeping him alive for 7 years. But Solomon's legal troubles had actually begun much earlier in 2021 when he was offered a job as a chaplain with the Oregon Department of Corrections. The job offer was eventually rescinded because he couldn't clear up an FBI flag in his background check. This flag, his lawyers argue, was based on a case of mistaken identity. His fingerprints didn't match prints recorded in the government's terrorism screening database. Desperate for answers, Solomon filed record requests with federal agencies and eventually took them to court. But instead of clearing his name, the legal action seemed to paint a target on his back. Federal authorities informed him in December 2024 that they would begin the process of revoking his asylum status. By June 3, 2025, his asylum was officially terminated. The Trump administration branded him a terrorist sympathizer, claims his legal team says are baseless smears that he has evidence to rebut. The detention sparked immediate outrage in Cincinnati. Hundreds in the community rallied to support the man they knew as a compassionate healer. State representatives, including Rachel Baker and Munir Abdullahi, called for his release. Local clergy gathered nearly 500 signatures on a letter of support. Protests erupted, some turning violent, with clashes with police on the Roebling Bridge. But the most shocking part of this story was yet to come. On the night of August 2, 2025, Solomon wanted to do what he had done countless times before: lead a small group of Muslim inmates in their daily prayers. All his previous guards had allowed it, but the guard on duty that night told him no. What followed was a back and forth that would land Solomon in segregated detention. what his friends describe as solitary confinement. Solomon repeatedly asked for an explanation from the guard, who remained obstinate in refusing to provide one. When Solomon headed to the phone room to call his contact person and complain, around half a dozen people entered the room and seized him. One of them had a gun, according to Reverend Judy Ragsdale, a Cincinnati clergy member who visited Solomon after his release from isolation. After interviews with Solomon and the guard, jail officials determined the imam was in the wrong. He was placed in segregated detention from August 2nd to August 5th, 4 days that would fundamentally change him. The conditions were harsh and deliberately isolating. Solomon was denied access to visitors during the entire period. Phone calls, including with his lawyers, were limited to just 1 hour between midnight and 1 a.m. He was denied access to religious materials and the right to freely practice his faith, the very thing that had landed him in isolation in the first place. He slept poorly, managing only a few hours per night, in part because of a noisy cellmate who appeared to be in crisis, reading aloud, repeatedly flushing the toilet all night, and threatening to harm him. His lawyers filed a habeas corpus petition claiming this segregated detention was the result of targeted harassment due to his attempt to practice his religion. They argue that Butler County Sheriff's Office, under the authority of the Department of Homeland Security, unlawfully used solitary confinement to prevent attorneys' access to their clients, limiting their ability to fight against deportation. The experience took a devastating toll on Solomon's mental health. Before his detention, friends described him as calm, pensive, and an attentive listener. Ahmed El-Qadi, one of Soliman's close friends and his designated contact person while in custody, noticed dramatic changes immediately after the isolation period. Solomon's speech quickened dramatically. He began talking very fast, not allowing others to speak, as if he wanted to throw information at people because he knew his time was limited. The anxiety was palpable in his voice. When Reverend Elizabeth Diop visited him via video screen at the jail, she was shocked by what she saw. It felt like she was looking into the face of somebody who had just been tortured, she told reporters. This was a man who had survived torture in Egypt, built a new life in America, and dedicated himself to comforting others in their darkest moments, now broken by 4 days in isolation. But the story gets even more disturbing when you consider what happened to those who tried to support him. 2 chaplains at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, Reverend Elizabeth Diop and D. Adam Allen, were fired for speaking out in support of their former colleague. Diop was terminated after giving media interviews supporting Solomon. Allen was fired after participating in prayer vigils and rallies, even though he wore a shirt that explicitly stated his views did not represent the hospital. The hospital's CEO, Steve Davis, sent an internal letter to staff warning them about speaking out, reminding employees that misinformation and lack of context can spread quickly and urging them to trust that hospital leaders were making decisions with the best interests of patients and families in mind. But Allen and Diop weren't buying it. They knew the man they had worked alongside, the chaplain who had comforted grieving families and found free funeral services for poor families who couldn't afford to bury their infants. "I don't regret this," Diop said after her firing. "I regret that the hospital fired me. I regret their silence in the matter. I'm a chaplain, right? I don't regret that God called me to do justice, love, kindness." Allen was equally defiant. "The hospital can find another chaplain," he said. "I can't find another Amen." Even after losing their jobs, both former chaplains continue advocating for Solomon's release. They understand what's at stake, not just for their friend, but for the precedent this case could set. As Solomon's lawyer, Robert Ratliff, explained, if this case is allowed to stand, the United States government will be able to retroactively revoke asylum status based on internet articles and shifting claims. This affects not just Solomon, but every asylum seeker in America who thought they had found safety. The case has drawn comparisons to other recent ICE actions targeting students and professionals. Mahmoud Khalil, a Palestinian Columbia University student and green card holder, was arrested and transferred to a Louisiana detention center before a court ordered his release after more than 100 days. Rumeysa Öztürk, a Tufts University student from Turkey, was arrested by a plainclothes ICE agents and held for 45 days. These cases suggest a pattern of targeting individuals with legal status, using shifting justifications to detain and potentially deport people who have built lives in America. Currently, Solomon remains in the Butler County Jail, appearing virtually at immigration hearings in Cleveland. A federal judge has issued temporary restraining orders preventing his removal from Ohio while his case proceeds, but these are temporary measures. His next hearing is scheduled for later this month. The broader implications of this case extend far beyond one man's fate. Butler County Jail houses hundreds of ICE detainees under a federal contract that pays the county $68 per detainee per day, plus $36 per hour for transportation. Most of these detainees aren't facing violent criminal charges. They're people like Solomon, caught in an immigration system that can separate families and destroy lives based on bureaucratic decisions made thousands of miles away. Solomon's case also highlights the use of solitary confinement in immigration detention, a practice that human rights organizations have long criticized as torture. His lawyers argue that the jail used isolation as a tool to slow down his legal defense, limiting his access to counsel and making it harder for him to fight his deportation. Meanwhile, Solomon continues to minister to others even from behind bars. Friends say that from his first day at the jail, he asked about accommodations for Muslim inmates and has been advocating for kosher and halal meals. When someone in another block wanted to see a chaplain, Solomon talked to them for an hour through a wall-in door. If he's released and allowed to remain in Ohio, multiple associates say he wants to return regularly to the Butler County Jail to serve as a chaplain, even to the place that put him in solitary confinement for trying to practice his faith. This is the measure of the man at the center of this case, someone who, after being tortured in Egypt, detained in America, and broken by solitary confinement, still wants to comfort others in their darkest moments. The question now is whether the American justice system will recognize what the Cincinnati community already knows, that Amon Solomon represents the best of what America can be, not a threat to be eliminated. As this case moves through the courts, it will test fundamental questions about religious freedom, due process, and what it means to find refuge in America. For Solomon's friends and supporters, the answer is clear. They've seen the man who found free funerals for grieving families, who comforted children facing death, and who continues to minister to others even from behind bars. They know that sending him back to Egypt isn't justice. It's a death sentence for someone whose only crime was seeking safety and dedicating his life to helping others. The outcome of this case will reverberate far beyond the Butler County Jail. It will determine whether asylum can be retroactively revoked based on shifting government claims, whether religious practice can be punished with solitary confinement, and whether America will remain a place where people like Amon Solomon can find refuge and rebuild their lives in service to others. For now, the former chaplain remains in custody, forever changed by his experience, in isolation, but still holding on to the hope that justice will prevail. His friends continue to pray for his release, knowing that time is running out for the man who spent his career comforting others in their race against time. This is more than an immigration case. It's a test of American values, and the outcome will determine whether we're still the country that offers refuge to those fleeing persecution, or whether we've become something else entirely.